through your time in homicide, you've developed several nicknames. One is Hurricane Julie, referring to the force you become in the thick of a case. So what drives your energies and passions in solving a homicide case?
You know, you are entrusted with investigating the death of a human being. And there's one thing I've learned is that it doesn't matter who's lying on the ground. They all have families, and they all cry the same, and they all miss their loved ones the same.
Right.
And I learned very quickly that it doesn't matter who is the person that's lying on the ground. They all get the same attention, the same drive. So it doesn't matter if it's an 8-year-old little girl. It doesn't matter if it's a little spooky, because they both have families that love them and miss them. And it's not what happened to them isn't right.
Right.
I'm very religious. I'm Catholic. I believe only one person can decide when your life should end on this earth, and it certainly isn't the person that pulled the trigger or that stuck him with a knife. I take that responsibility very seriously, and so I like meeting my victims' families. I like getting to know them. I think that's what gives me drive. I think that's what gives me the fortitude to keep pushing forward when I'm tired, when I'm sick. I think about that mother crying. I think about how they're missing their loved one on Christmas and Thanksgiving. And you realize that for them, it's this huge open wound when it initially happens. And it's the worst thing that you could do is show up on someone's door and tell them that their loved one's not only gone, but been murdered. And you just see that pain. And you know that it's awful. And that big open wound that you just left them will heal, but it'll forever be a scar. Right. It doesn't matter how much time goes by. And, I like to send messages on the anniversaries of deaths and birthdays. And sometimes I feel bad and I think to myself, oh, maybe I shouldn't remind them. And then you think to yourself, they never forget. And so that is one of the reasons why I like to keep my victims up on a wall so that they're ever present and never forgotten.
It's amazing because I think a lot of detectives, and I don't want to generalize because I don't know your world, I don't know detectives, but there's a perception, persona that a lot of them put up protective walls against the evil, because how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it day in and day out, what you see humanity do to one another? And yet you're willing to invest and take a deep dive into these people's lives, walk that pain with them, get intimately involved, call them year after year. I also read that you obviously call them on birthdays and anniversaries. You have a corkboard with each of the victims' pictures with a rosary. That's unique. That's high touch. That's uncommon in my experience of stories I've read and how people deal on a detective side with crime. So beyond the fact that you're connecting, what drives that approach? I mean, because you're sort of tailoring to the victim what's gone on, and you're investing in a very deep, real way, which most people to deal with it just. Maybe they go to the bottle. Maybe they just arm's length, and I don't want to deal with humanity, but I'll just solve the cases as if it's just a person or a number. But you take personal interest. So what about you drives that part of your approach to your job?
It actually started with my third homicide. It wasn't very easy to solve, and I knew who had done the crime, but I just had to prove it. And it took me about 11 months, and I actually became very good friends with the sister of the victim. I'm still good friends with her now. And I was very frustrated, and I didn't know what to do, and I felt like I was missing something. And I remember just, being raised Catholic, my grandmothers prayed the Rosary a lot. And it's a form of meditation, and it's kind of a way to clear your mind. And so I remember picking up a rosary and just going to my church, St. Boniface, and I wanted to think about David and his life and kind of almost reach out to him like, buddy, you need to help me. If you can hear me, I need some kind of guidance. And so I just started praying a rosary for him, and it just kind of started from there. And now, anytime I pick up a new case, I pick up a rosary. I pray a rosary for my victims within 24 hours of their death. And I continue to use that rosary during the investigation. And then when it's over, I give it to the family, whether they're Catholic or not. They all seem to appreciate it. And then the letting go of it is also, I think, a little bit symbolic for me. It's just like I've done all I can do for you. I need to let you go because I need to pick up somebody else, and unfortunately. But it is, I think it's a way for me to clear my mind and meditate and kind of stay one with my Maker and hopefully get back.
Have you gotten insights when you've done the prayer of the Rosary, when you talk to the victims from the great beyond? Is that giving you some breakthroughs?
I think I do. I keep a notebook next to my bed because, as a homicide detective, your mind is always spinning, especially when you're working a fresh case. And so I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, I got to jot down this idea. And I learned that because, or if not, you don't sleep. So it's just kind of a way to kind of get that in my head, and it's there on paper in the morning, so I won't forget it. So no, I think they help. So I was talking about the case that I went to when I was a new patrol cop, and when I went to homicide, one of the questions I asked the senior guy there was, "Hey, whatever happened to the girl that was buried out in the canyon?" And he says, "Oh, it's unsolved." And
Really?
I said, "Really?" I'm like, "Oh, that's terrible." And so for the first 7 years in homicide, I worked fresh cases. For the last 2 years, my boss has made a decision that I'm going to work cold cases. And one of the first things, we had to kind of strike a deal because I was dead against it. I need to be connected to my cases. I need to be there, see the scene, meet the family. So I didn't know if I would be effective in working cold cases. And so I said, that's fine. I'll go against my wishes, but I'll go. But I get to pick my cases. And he's like, well, we'll talk about it. He's like, you get to pick 2. So I eventually picked up a case, and the first one I picked up was her.
Wow.
And the very first thing I did is I went and went to her burial site, had a conversation with her, picked a rosary for her, and I said, you know what, you've been asleep for way too long. It's time for you and I to work together. And this year I ended up solving the case.